For 509 days, Hamas has been holding hostages in captivity in Gaza. 63 hostages remain in the terror dungeons. Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Wasserman Lande. Today is February 26, 2025. This is the live daily briefing of the Israeli Citizen Spokespersons Office. Today is a sad day in Israel and for the entire Jewish world. In fact, this is not a Jewish tragedy, but a human one. This morning, I saw crowds lining Israel's streets that were holding orange balloons and waving orange flags, together with Israel's blue and white flag. Israelis came out to mourn the cruel murder of the Bibas babies and their mother. Israelis came out to embrace their father, who was himself freed from Hamas captivity after 500 days, only to find out that Hamas have murdered his 2 boys and their mother, strangled. The Bibas babies were the youngest hostages taken by Hamas. Unfortunately, they were not the youngest executed or mutilated. It is clear to Israel's people and to much of the world, Hamas are monsters. Hamas child murderers cannot be Israel's neighbors, and they must not have any future in Gaza or anywhere else. Egypt understands this, hence they don't want them in their territory. Jordan understands this, hence they don't want them in their territory. In fact, nobody wants them in their territory. Hamas is openly preparing for more war, so it can do yet another October 7th. They film themselves roaming the streets of Gaza with weapons and uniforms. They make no secret of their ambitions. They continue to radicalize and indoctrinate their population and their children to hate and terrorize Israel, the Jews, and the West. Hamas bought a ceasefire by ransoming hostages, living and dead, for the release of murderers who had performed terror attacks within Israel against civilians, blowing up buses, shopping malls, and more civilian targets. Since Israel's troops left much of the Gaza Strip, Hamas is in fact using the ceasefire to repair tunnels in order to attack Israel, manufacture new bombs and arms in general, recruit and train new terrorists, and torture Gazans to find out who are the spies amongst them. All this with a humanitarian aid which is sent to them by hundreds of trucks on a daily basis. This is as per the reporting of the Wall Street Journal, not myself. Hamas official Osama Hamdan said that the weapons of the resistance are not up for discussion, or in other words, disarming is something which the Hamas terrorist organization is simply not willing to do. Hamas official Hazan Qasem said Israel's demand to remove Hamas from Gaza is laughable. In his words, the resistance will not leave, and disarmament is out of the question. That is why Israel is guided by the following 3 goals: eliminate Hamas military capability and political rule in Gaza, bring all hostages home, ensure Gaza never again threatens our people. Hamas is not interested in peace. In fact, it exists for war. Hamas only stopped the war today so that they can be ready for yet more war tomorrow. And what about that tomorrow? Everyone is talking about reconstruction. In fact, the World Bank published estimates of reconstructing Gaza, of reconstructing Lebanon. What about the reconstruction of Israel? the Israeli villages that Hamas invaded, occupied, and burnt, the Israeli towns that Hezbollah destroyed with anti-tank missiles, the tens of thousands of Israelis who fled their homes after October 7th and have not yet returned. Who is going to pay for the reconstruction of what Hamas and Hezbollah and the Iranian regime destroyed in Israel? We are talking about billions of dollars worth of damage, not to mention the human loss of lives and trauma. Now, Israel pushing Syria jihadis away is also being talked about. Israel told Syria's new jihadi rulers to stay away. Now Israel's jets are pushing them away. In fact, Israel's defense minister said jets struck targets in southern Syria to keep the jihadi regime and other terrorists out of the area. A day earlier, Israel's prime minister said, "We will not allow the forces of Hayat al-Tahrir, Asham, or the new Syrian army to enter the area." He added, Israel would protect the Druze. Jihadis see the Druze as heretics, non-believers. Israel sees the Druze as potential allies. Southern Syria is in fact the Druze homeland, Mount Druze or Jabal Druze. Southern Syria also borders Israel's strategic Golan Heights. Iran's Shia axis was weakened in Syria. The Assad regime fell and their Hezbollah allies are in retreat. But the new Sunni rulers are ex-ISIS, ex-al-Qaeda extremists. The jihadis, Salafis currently ruling Syria will not tolerate a Jewish state. It is against their core belief and ideology. Neither will they tolerate the West. Once they're established and once the West takes them off the blacklists and removes sanctions against Syria, once the international arena begins to invest in Syria and the regime manages to stabilize and develop the country again, they cannot and will not be shaken from their core Salafist belief, and that is the creation of a worldwide Islamic caliphate based on Sharia law. Now let's take some questions from our audience watching live on social media.
Thank you, Ruth. Our first question comes from X. Where does the hostage deal stand at this point?
Thank you for that very, very difficult and challenging question. Israel's first and foremost, let's say, prerogative is to bring our people home. Those people that are being tortured and kept by the designated terrorist organization Hamas in the tunnels inside Gaza. And unfortunately, there are difficulties in this negotiation as inherent to any talk with any designated terrorist organization, particularly after the Hamas has received hundreds of truckloads of aid every single day in order to trade with this aid and demand money from their own people in order to be able to rearm themselves. After the IDF has removed itself from the Netzarim corridor so that hundreds of thousands and millions of Gazans can move towards the north part of the Gaza Strip that is closer to Israel's borders. Why? So that the Hamas can embed themselves amidst the civilian population, as they always do, and use them as human shields. Once they receive these demands, they don't really have anything to lose. Why not keep the hostages? And therefore, Israel is at a very, very fragile moment because the leverages that Israel had on Hamas are moving lower and lower.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Instagram. What's the situation in Jenin and Judea and Samaria with IDF troops on the ground?
Also, a very important question. The Iranian regime has been arming the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad inside Judea and Samaria for years. How? By smuggling weapons via Jordanian territory, as if this was some backyard of the Iranian regime, and as against and opposing the Hashemite kingdom's wishes, it used the Jordanian territory to smuggle arms to the Hamas and to the Islamic Jihad in Judea and Samaria, and drugs to the Hezbollah in Lebanon. And what it has done is basically it was funding, arming, training, inciting, and encouraging the terrorists and the jihadis and the Islamists within Judea and Samaria to undermine the actual leadership of Abu Mazen. In other words, what they were trying to do and what they did was create an existence of radical Islam, Palestinians that are armed by the Iranian regime on the border between Judea and Samaria and the Green Line and Israeli villages on the other side. And this is what Israel is currently needing to deal with. The fact that there are always attempts at terrorism, at bombings of civilians, at attempting to export that terrorism and terror into proper Israeli territory. And this is something that cannot be accepted by any country, not only Israel.
Thank you. This is our final question. Aviva on Instagram asks, is Egypt continuing to militarize on Israel's border? What do we know about this?
So this is a very fragile situation in which this is not perhaps politically correct. It's not very convenient to say, but the Egyptians have been arming themselves to the T, creating a stronghold in their navy, creating underground tunnels, storage rooms, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of tanks, and a lot of personnel over and above the peace treaty with Israel. They've been doing this in the Sinai Peninsula, and they've been explaining this for some years as preparing to deal with terrorist cells within the Sinai Peninsula. But the enhancement of their military presence doesn't justify that. In fact, it is more like a preparation against a country. And that country is Israel. And that is very, very concerning. On the one hand, there's no real incentive, at least not in the mind of a Western logic or Israeli logic, for Egypt to attack Israel. This doesn't make sense. On the other hand, there have been very, very warlike statements made by the Egyptian elite and the heads of the state in the past year concerning what will happen to Israel if the Gazans will be pushed more towards the Egyptian border. You see, the Egyptians are terrified. They are panicking vis-a-vis the possibility of Hamas and Gazans moving into the Sinai Peninsula. Now, one may ask oneself why. There are 2 million Gazans, and that's it, while there are 110 million Egyptians. Plus, there's so much land in the Sinai Peninsula. So what are the Egyptians worried about? Well, their concern is actually very legitimate. They know what the Palestinians have done in Lebanon, what they've done to destabilize Tunisia, what they've done to destabilize Kuwait. They know what they are doing in Jordan against the Hashemite kingdom with the support of the Iranian regime. And they know that they are the Muslim Brotherhood, and therefore they will seek to destabilize Egypt from within if they come into the Sinai Peninsula. And therefore, legitimately, they are standing on their hind legs to prevent the movement and the seeping of Palestinian Gazans from the Gaza Strip into Egypt by all means, including, despite it being very, very strange for the Western mind and for the Israeli mind to understand, waging a war against Israel. Plus, we need to remember that the Egyptian regime has been telling the Egyptian people for over 4 decades, despite the peace agreement, that unfortunately Israel is the enemy, not a partner for peace. And this is unbelievable. Despite the fact that we have a peace treaty with the country, the messaging, the curriculum, the educational system, all tell the young generation of Egypt, 110 million strong, that Israel is the enemy. And this must change. Thank you so much for being with us today. Take care, God bless, and please God, we will see all our hostages back home.